Left under a pile of dirt by her stepmother, the little alien girl's voice was heard by one human.
Corin Vale had no reason to be walking this far into Dravara IX's forgotten quarter. His work as an archival restorer usually kept him inside the main dome, hunched over cracked registry slates, repairing water-damaged star charts, and sealing brittle court records so they wouldn't crumble when handled. But the supply runner who owed him a replacement set of sealing cloth hadn't delivered on time. That cloth was the only thing keeping the edges of certain old paper maps from flaking away into dust. If he didn't get it, another month's work would be lost. So, after logging out of the archive early, he took the tram halfway to the outer trade lane and walked the rest. His route cut through the neglected sector where old cargo shells, stripped shuttle fuselages, and rusted scaffolds leaned into each other. The path smelled of wet metal and burnt earth, the air filtration weaker here. It was a place where nothing happened quickly, except for trouble. Corin had grown up on a quieter station where everyone knew everyone and no one left a child or a pet alone in public. Here, you kept your head down and your pace steady because you couldn't be sure what you'd find if you looked too closely. He was almost at the stairs that would lead him back toward the tram stop when he heard it. Faint, muffled, almost part of the wind. His boots stopped on their own. Years of careful habit made him scan his surroundings before moving toward it. His eyes tracked the jagged edges of the nearest collapsed cargo wall. Beneath one tilted section, a low mound of loose, damp soil pressed up against the metal. Something about its shape was wrong, too smooth, too recently disturbed. No weeds or scrap cluttered its surface. He stepped closer, heart ticking faster, trying to separate the sound from the hum of a distant coolant pump. There it was again, a voice, small, tight, and barely pushing past the soil. The words weren't clear, but they were definitely there. Corin crouched, pulled off his gloves, and pressed his bare hand to the mound. Cold. The dirt held moisture. It had been moved recently. He told himself it could be a small animal, a trapped vent pipe, or even an abandoned piece of equipment still leaking air. But the part of him that had lived here long enough knew better. No one left functioning gear in this quarter, and animals didn't speak. He started digging with his hands. The soil clung to his fingers, compacted and heavy. His nails caught on small stones, and his knuckles split against buried debris. Cold grit stung the cuts, but he didn't stop. The first handful broke apart easily. The second was wetter, heavier. On the third, his fingers brushed fabric, thin, damp, and pressed flat. He dug around it carefully, freeing space until his hand slid beneath and touched skin. Smooth, cold, small. Now there was no mistaking it. He worked faster, prying clumps loose, tossing them aside. The edge of his pry bar helped lift a stubborn slab of compacted dirt, revealing more fabric, then a narrow shoulder. The mound collapsed slightly, exposing a face, blue skin under a layer of dust and mud. Strands of long green hair stuck across the cheeks. A crude breathing tube, bent and clogged with soil, lay against her mouth. Someone had put it there deliberately. That meant they'd taken time. That meant they hadn't expected anyone to interrupt. Corin yanked the tube away and brushed soil from her lips. She coughed, a wet, strained sound, and more dirt spilled from her mouth. Her eyes opened to slits, pale teal under heavy lids, focusing on him for a fraction of a second before she whispered one halting word in broken human speech. "Dad." The sound hit harder than he expected. He swallowed the tightness in his throat. "I've got you," he said. Her breathing was shallow, ribs moving under thin cloth that had once been ceremonial, silver-threaded, sleeveless, slit at the sides. Now it was soaked and caked in dirt. Her bare feet were buried in mud. He freed them, wrapped her in his coat, and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a dangerous sign in a child her size. He looked back at the mound before leaving. The dirt was uneven, hurriedly packed, but deep enough to conceal her. No signs of panic digging from inside. That told him she'd been too weak or too scared to even try. He scanned the alley. A recycler cart rattled 2 streets over. A food vendor pushed a steamer on bad wheels, eyes fixed ahead. No one looked his way. In this quarter, as long as trouble stayed quiet, no one interfered. He started walking, adjusting his hold so her head rested against his chest without jarring. Her hand found the edge of his shirt sleeve and clung. She was cold to the touch, even through the coat. Corin's mind worked while his body moved. He knew the dome's medical office wouldn't help. They'd ask for identification, find the nearest legal guardian, and return her without asking how she ended up half buried in the outer sector. And from what he'd just seen, that guardian was the problem. No, she was safer with him tonight. He could keep her warm, give her water, and figure out the rest after she was stable. His records hall wasn't far. It had thick walls, a working heater, and a door that locked from the inside. He'd converted it years ago when he realized he worked better alone and didn't like anyone standing over his shoulder while he restored fragile history. It was quiet, insulated from the chaos outside, and it would keep her hidden. The climb up the service stairs was slow. He kept his back to the wall in case his boots slipped on the damp metal treads. The higher he went, the colder the air became as the dome's recycled flow thinned. She shivered in his arms, fingers tightening on his sleeve. He told her softly, "You're safe with me," unsure if she understood, but needing her to hear it. By the time he reached the hall's entrance, his gloves were stuffed in his pocket, his hands raw from digging. The door was old but solid, its locking mechanism repaired with scavenged parts. He nudged it open with his shoulder and stepped into the warm, paper-scented air. Inside, dim lamps lit rows of drawers filled with preserved charts and documents. A couch sat against the back wall beside a wash basin and a coil heater. He set her down gently on a folded blanket, pulled the coat tighter around her, and checked her breathing again. Still fast, but steadier than before. Her eyes followed him as he crossed to the kettle. "Water," she whispered. He filled a cup and brought it over. "Small sips," he said, holding it for her. She obeyed, though her hands trembled as she gripped the cup. He took it back, set it down, and started warming more water to clean the dirt from her face and hair. He didn't ask questions yet. The way she flinched at small sounds told him enough for now. Whoever had put her in that mound hadn't been a stranger. As the heater hummed and steam rose from the basin, Corin made a quiet decision. She wasn't going back to whoever had done this. Not tonight. Not ever, if he could help it. The kettle's whistle cut softly through the room's quiet. Not the sharp, shrill kind used in busy kitchens, but the low, steady tone of an old coil heater that had boiled more water for ink work than for food. Corin turned it off before it startled her again. Lyray's eyes were half closed, but still tracking his movements, cautious, as if she expected him to leave without warning. He knelt beside the couch, rolling his sleeves past his elbows. The warm, damp cloth in his hand steamed faintly. "This will be quick," he said, "just cleaning the dirt off so you can breathe easier." She gave no sign she understood, but she didn't pull away when he brushed the cloth over her cheek. Soil and grit came away in dark streaks, revealing patches of soft blue skin underneath. Her hair was another matter. The long green strands were tangled with mud and brittle weeds. He worked them free slowly, untwisting each knot with his fingers before pulling the debris out. She winced twice but didn't speak. When he reached behind her ear, a sharp scent rose, damp earth mixed with something faintly metallic, like rusted water pipes. It told him she'd been lying in that mound longer than he first guessed. He remembered the breathing tube. Who had put it there? It wasn't something a stranger would bother with if they meant harm. That detail made the situation worse. It meant someone who knew her well, close enough to stand over her and watch her struggle, had still walked away. Her voice broke the silence. Cold. He nodded once, rose, and adjusted the small floor heater so its warm air ran under the blanket. Better? She didn't answer, only shifted her legs closer to the source of heat. The water in the basin was already cooling, so he replaced it with fresh hot water mixed with a drop of antiseptic. As he cleaned the dirt from her arms, he noticed thin, fading marks along her forearms. Not cuts, more like the pressure lines left from being gripped too hard. Another answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. Her gaze drifted to the shelves stacked with chart tubes and sealed record cases. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice low and rough. "Records Hall," Corin said. "I keep history from falling apart." He gestured to the walls. Maps, family slates, ship logs, anything someone thought was worth keeping. She studied him like she was measuring whether his work made him trustworthy. "You live here?" "I work here. Sometimes sleep here." He hesitated, then added, "Tonight, you'll sleep here too." That drew a reaction. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in the stunned way someone reacts to an offer they didn't expect. She glanced at the door, then back at him. Lock. He stood and slid the bolt with a solid metal click. Locked. He didn't explain further. He knew she didn't need a speech, just proof. He brought her a ration strip and a small bowl of broth. She ate the strip slowly, tearing off pieces as if stretching it to last longer. Halfway through, she set it down, eyes on him. "Why did you stop?" It took him a moment to realize she meant why he had stopped in the alley. "Because I heard you," he said plainly, "and I don't walk past voices in the dirt." She blinked, as if running that answer through her head to test if it was true. Whatever she decided, she picked up the strip again and finished it. When she was done, he refilled her cup with warm water. She drank without being told, a sign she was starting to trust the offer wouldn't be taken away. He needed to know more. "Do you remember who left you there?" Her jaw tightened. She looked at the coat wrapped around her and then to the floor. "Stepmother," she said, almost spitting the word. Said, "Learn stillness." Corin didn't let his expression change. Inside, it confirmed what he had suspected. The familiarity of the act, the deliberate placement of the tube, the lack of struggle. He kept his voice level. "And your father?" "Gone. Works in the deep pits. Doesn't see me." She hesitated, then added, "She hates me." That was enough for tonight. Pressing further would only shut her down. He nodded once, as if to mark the information, then leaned back. "You won't see her here." Her eyes lifted at that, a brief flash of something almost like hope. She didn't speak again. He stood and moved to the small back room where he stored supply crates. Pulling a folded thermal blanket from the top shelf, he brought it to the couch and spread it over her legs. She shifted under the extra weight, testing its warmth. "You can sleep now," he said. "The heater will stay on." For the first time, her grip on his sleeve loosened completely. She turned her face toward the couch back, eyes half shut, but he could see she wasn't asleep yet. She was listening, to the room, to his movements, to the way the door stayed locked. Corin sat at his work table, pulling a damaged star chart toward him out of habit. His hands hovered over it, but didn't start the repair. His thoughts kept returning to the prints in the dirt, the high-heeled boot marks, and the fact that no one else had stopped. He glanced at her once more. She was still watching him, but her eyes closed slowly when she realized he'd noticed. She wasn't just falling asleep. She was testing if she could. Corin decided he would keep watch until she did. Whatever came next could wait until morning. Corin woke before the dome's morning shift lights came up. The records hall was still dim, lit only by the low orange glow of the heater beside the couch. He'd fallen asleep in his chair, with his boots off, head leaning against the wall. His neck ached, but the first thing he checked was the couch. Lyra was still there, curled under the blanket, with her face turned toward the room. At some point in the night, she'd shifted so that one hand rested on the edge of his coat, which he'd left draped over her. Her breathing was slow and even now, a good sign. He stood quietly, moved to the door, and cracked it enough to check the alley outside. No one was there. The mound where he'd found her wouldn't last long. The quarter's wind and foot traffic would level it within a day. It was better that way, less for anyone to trace. The heater's coil ticked as it cooled. Corin adjusted the dial and stepped back to the couch. Her eyes opened halfway, alert faster than most children her age. That told him more than she'd said the night before. Children who were used to safety didn't wake like that. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice low. She blinked, then pulled the blanket up to her chin. "It's still dark." "Dome lights come up soon. Are you hungry?" Her hesitation before answering was the same as last night, the pause to calculate whether the offer was real. "Yes." He poured water into the kettle, set it on the coil, and unsealed a ration packet. As the water heated, the air filled with the faint scent of broth concentrate. She watched him the whole time, her eyes moving between his hands and the food. "You were cold last night," he said. "Any better now?" She nodded. "Better." The first question he'd held back finally came out. "How long were you in that dirt before I got there?" Her gaze dropped to the blanket. "Since morning. She covered me when the sun came." That put it at nearly 10 hours. Corin felt a tightness in his chest. Did anyone else come by? "No, people don't go there. It's dead street." That explained why her stepmother had chosen it. No witnesses, no reason for anyone to look closely. When the broth was ready, he set the cup in front of her. She cupped it with both hands and took slow sips. But her eyes kept darting to the door. He noticed and decided to address it directly. "No one's coming through that door unless I open it. You're safe here." Her eyes stayed on him, as if weighing whether he meant it. Why? He understood what she was really asking. Why was he keeping her here at all? Because what happened yesterday doesn't happen again, not while you're with me. She seemed to accept that for now. After breakfast, Corin pulled a small folding stool over to the couch and sat. "I need to know more about you. What's your full name?" "Liray. Just Liray." "No family name?" She shook her head. "Father never gave me one."
Says, "I don't need it." That was unusual, but not unheard of in the outer colonies, and it told Corin her father likely wanted to keep her off official registries. That could make finding her safer in the long term, but it also meant she had no legal protection. "Do you have anything of yours, something from before?" She thought, then pointed to her sandals by the waist pail. "Bead and shoe, it's mine." Porin stood, fetched the bead he'd found, and handed it to her. She closed her fingers around it like it was something far more valuable than it looked. "From my mother," she said softly. He sat back down. "She's gone?" Lyra nodded. "Long time." The weight in her voice told him not to push further yet. As the dome lights finally brightened, shadows in the room pulled back, revealing the rows of records and charts. Lyra's gaze moved over them with more interest than last night. "You fix all these?" "I do," Corin said. "Every piece has a history." He paused, then added, "So do you." She tilted her head slightly, unsure if he meant it as comfort or obligation. He spent the rest of the morning cleaning a section of the back room. He wanted her to have a place that felt like hers, even if it was small. She followed him after a while, holding the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. He handed her a soft brush and pointed to a low shelf. "If you want, you can help." She didn't answer, but began dusting carefully, as if afraid to damage anything. Every few minutes she glanced toward the door, the habit still strong, but each time her eyes returned to him, the pauses got shorter. By midday, they'd cleared enough space for a small bedroll and a crate that could serve as a table. He left the blanket on the bedroll and stepped back. "This will be yours." She stood in the doorway, looking at the space. "It's not locked." "No, but the door to the hall is. No one gets in." Something in her shoulders eased, even if she didn't say so. She stepped inside and set the bead from her sandal on the crate, as if marking it as her territory. For Corin, it was a small shift, the first sign she was thinking of staying, even if she didn't say it out loud. For her, it was a quiet test, seeing if her things would still be there tomorrow. He intended to make sure they would. The first real daylight from Dravara 9's main dome filtered through the high vents of the records hall, flattening the shadows that had clung to the corners all night. Corin had kept the heater low to conserve fuel cells, but the air was still warmer here than outside. The small back room where Lyra now sat had the faint smell of dust and paper glue, nothing like the damp soil she'd been pulled from. She was perched cross-legged on the bedroll, the blanket draped around her shoulders. The bead from her sandal sat on the crate table beside her. She was turning it in her palm, over and over, as if making sure it hadn't vanished while she'd slept. Corin sat at his work table, scanning a registry slate for damage, but his focus wasn't on the chart lines. She'd been quiet all morning, except for a few short replies when he'd asked about breakfast. That silence wasn't shyness, it was the weight of something she hadn't said yet. He decided to nudge her toward it without cornering her. "The place I found you, you said your stepmother put you there in the morning. Did she say why?" Lyra's fingers stopped turning the bead. Her eyes stayed on it as she answered. "I spilled water, the storage jug. She got angry." Corin kept his tone even. "Angry enough to bury you in dirt?" "She said I waste things. She said I make trouble. Then she told me to be still." Lyra's voice thinned. "She said if I couldn't keep still, I'd stay under until I learned." Corin's grip on the slate tightened. He forced himself to ease it before he cracked the casing. "Did she give you that tube to breathe through?" A short nod. "It was blocked when you came." The detail landed harder than he expected. Whoever had done it hadn't cared if she lived or not. They just wanted her out of sight. He set the slate down. "Did your father see this?" "No, he was working." She hesitated, then added in a quieter voice, "He never sees it."
Corin studied her face. She wasn't trying to win pity. She was stating facts the way someone lists inventory. That made it worse. "You understand," he said. "You're not going back there." She looked at him then, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "They always go back." "Not this time." The words hung between them, and he let them stay. By midday, the hall had grown busier outside. The market lanes on the other side of the quarter drew scavengers and traders. Corin knew they couldn't stay locked inside forever. Sooner or later, he'd have to take her out if he wanted to keep feeding her without drawing questions. The problem was how she'd react in public. He tested the ground gently. "I need to pick up a few things today. You can stay here, or you can come with me. If you come, you stay close, always in arm's reach." Liray's head lifted slightly. "Where?" "Mid-sector market. Safer than here, but crowded." Her eyes narrowed at the word crowded, but after a moment she said, "I'll go." He gave her a spare wool cap from a supply crate. "It's not to hide you," he said, "just to keep you warm." She pulled it down over her ears without argument. The walk to mid-sector took them past the tram stop and into a cleaner stretch of the dome. The air smelled of hot metal and frying bread instead of rust and rot. But Corin noticed every time a tall woman in a dark, high-collared coat passed nearby. Liray's hand tightened on his. Once she ducked slightly behind him without realizing she'd done it. At a fabric stall, he let her choose. She touched each bolt of cloth like it might vanish if she pressed too hard. In the end, she pointed to a muted teal weave. "Like my mother's dress," she said quietly. Corin didn't question it. He bought enough for a small garment and paid the tailor to keep the side-slit style of her heritage but make it thick enough for warmth. The tailor gave them a pickup date and they moved on. Halfway back to the hall, Lyra stopped dead. Her grip on his coat sleeve went rigid. Corin followed her line of sight and saw a woman in a long, fitted, dark coat speaking with a vendor across the lane. The angle was wrong for a clear look, but the posture, the hair, even the way she stood had a sharpness that matched what Lyra had described. Her breathing sped up. Without thinking, she stepped behind him fully, pressing against his back. "It's all right," Corin said, turning just enough so she could see his face. "She hasn't seen you. You're with me now." She shook her head quickly, eyes still fixed on the woman. Corin crouched slightly so they were level. He spoke firmly, loud enough for her to hear over the crowd, but not for anyone else. "You are mine to protect. She does not touch you. She does not take you. Do you understand?" After a moment, Lyra nodded. Her hand stayed tight on his sleeve as they walked away. She didn't look back. By the time they reached the hall, she was quieter, but her shoulders no longer hunched in that defensive curl she'd worn since the alley. She went straight to the back room and sat on the bedroll, her bead in her hand again. Corin didn't press her to talk. For now, it was enough that she'd chosen to walk out with him, and that she'd seen him put himself between her and the person she feared most. He locked the door, checked the heater, and sat at his table, knowing one thing for certain. The stepmother might still walk the markets of Drevara 9, but Lyra would not face her alone again. The next 2 days passed without leaving the hall. Corin used the time to measure what Lyra could handle, letting her move at her own pace while quietly noting each small shift in her behavior. The first morning after the market, she stayed in the back room until the smell of boiling broth reached her. She walked out without the blanket for the first time, wearing the wool cap and holding the bead in her hand. "Hungry?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the way her eyes tracked the bowl in his hand. She nodded, taking the seat at the small work table instead of the couch.
That alone told him she was beginning to think of the hall as somewhere she could move freely. Corin went back to repairing a damaged chart, but kept her in his peripheral vision. She ate with the same deliberate care as before, slow, small bites, no waste. When she finished, she slid the empty bowl toward him and stayed seated instead of retreating to her bedroll. "You work every day?" she asked suddenly, her gaze on the spread of maps. "Most days," he said. "If I don't, the records decay." She tilted her head. "What happens when they decay?" "They're lost forever." He glanced at her. "Some things deserve to be remembered." She studied him for a few seconds longer, as if weighing whether she belonged in that category. She didn't answer, but she stayed near while he worked. By mid-shift, she had begun exploring the main room. She ran her fingers along the drawers, tested the latch on a chart tube, and crouched to study a shelf of family slates. Corin didn't stop her. He wanted her to get used to touching things without fear of punishment. The only rule he gave was that she had to ask before opening a sealed container. That afternoon, the tailor's runner arrived with a cloth-wrapped bundle. Corin signed for it, waited until the door was locked again, and set it on the table. "Yours," he said. Lyra hesitated before unwrapping it. The garment was thick enough for the dome's cold sectors, but cut in the side-slit style of her people. The muted teal fabric caught the light in a way that made her skin's luminescent undertones stand out. She touched it carefully, then looked at him. "Try it on," he said. She disappeared into the back room. When she returned, the shift was gone, replaced by the new garment. It hung well, neither too tight nor too loose, and for the first time, she didn't have the look of someone wearing something borrowed. "It fits," he said simply. She glanced at the door, then back at him. "I can keep it?" "It's yours." That was the moment she smiled for the first time. Not wide, not long, but enough for him to see what she looked like when she wasn't braced for the next blow. She went back to the back room and didn't close the curtain all the way, as if wanting to stay connected to the sound of him working. In the evening, while he sorted a box of court slips, she came and stood beside him. "Can I help?" He slid a small stack toward her. "You can match these by seal color." She worked in silence, focused, and when she finished, the stacks were neatly aligned. It wasn't much, but it was something they'd done together. Before lights down, she sat cross-legged on the couch, tracing the seam of her new garment with her fingers. "If I go outside like this, she'll see me," she said quietly. Corin looked up from his work. "And if she does?" Her eyes flicked to him. "You'll be there?" "Every time." That answer seemed to be enough for her. She leaned back against the couch and for the first time didn't clutch her bead as she drifted toward sleep. Corin watched her for a moment before returning to his charts, knowing that something in her posture had changed, the smallest tilt toward trust. 3 days later, Corin decided they needed to go out again. The food stock was low, the heater coil was drawing more power than expected, and the only supplier who sold his preferred ceiling cloth was in mid-sector. He could go alone, but the last time he'd left her, she'd spent the entire afternoon pressed against the back wall of the hall, eyes fixed on the door as if she expected it to open without warning. He wasn't going to make her sit through that again. When he told her, she didn't answer right away. She was sitting on the bedroll, folding and refolding the edge of her new garment. "We're going where?" "Same market as before," he said. "Broad lanes, good space to move. You stay close to me." She set the fold down. "And if she's there?" Corin didn't hesitate. "Then she sees you're not alone." They left just after the dome's lights brightened to full day cycle.
Corin kept to the wider alleys where the air circulation was stronger, avoiding the tighter back lanes that smelled of damp metal and spilled coolant. Lyra walked beside him in her teal garment, the bead from her sandal tucked in her palm. She didn't cling to his sleeve this time, but every time someone tall in a dark coat passed them, her gaze locked on them until they were several steps away. The market was in full swing when they arrived, vendors calling out prices, grinders chewing through recycled metal, the sharp tang of frying oils in the air. Corin kept one hand on the strap of his supply bag and the other free, making it easy for her to take if she needed. At a food stall, he ordered preserved root packs and a tin of dried fruit strips. Lyra stood close, eyeing the other customers, but keeping her voice low when she spoke. "These smell better than the ones near the quarter." "They're cleaner," Corin said. "Fewer rats in mid-sector." They moved on to the fabric shop. While Corin negotiated for the ceiling cloth, he kept half an eye on her. She was standing near the front of the stall, head angled toward the street, and then he saw her freeze. Across the lane, a woman in a long, dark coat with a high collar was inspecting a rack of tools. The build, the posture, even the way her hair was tied was exactly as Lyra had described. This time, there was no mistaking it. Lyra's breath hitched, and she stepped back from the stall entrance. Her bead pressed hard into her palm. Corin set the roll of ceiling cloth under his arm and walked to her side, blocking her line of sight. "With me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "She'll see. She'll see that you're mine to protect." The woman turned slightly, scanning the crowd without any sign of recognition, then went back to her shopping. Corin didn't wait for more. He guided Lyra through the side of the stall and out into a narrower service lane. The sound of the market dimmed behind them. When they stopped, she was still gripping his coat. I thought she cut herself off, the words shaking. "She can't take you," Corin said. "Not here, not anywhere, if I'm with you." Her eyes searched his, as if testing whether he was saying it to calm her or because it was true. And if she follows, then she'll find the door locked in her face. They finished the rest of their errands in the quieter lanes, and by the time they reached the hall again, the tension in her shoulders had eased. She went straight to the back room, but instead of curling into the bedroll, she set her bead on the crate and came back out. "You didn't let her see me," she said, not quite a question. "I let her see enough," Corin replied, "that you're not where she left you." Something in her expression shifted, not a smile, but a recognition that the promise he'd made in the market last time hadn't been empty. She sat at the table while he unpacked supplies, staying there long after the work was done. The dome's day cycle had been steady for a week without power dips, and Corin used the stretch of stability to keep them both inside, working and reorganizing the hall. It was the safest rhythm they'd had since he pulled her from the dirt. No crowds, no chance encounters, no sudden alarms from outside. On the 6th morning, Lyra came out of the back room without the blanket or the cap. Her teal garment fit her properly now that she'd worn it in, the fabric softened, the edges curling slightly from washing. She sat at the work table without being asked, reaching for the small stack of registry slips Corin had left out. "You can sort by year," he said. "I know," she answered, already setting them into neat piles. Her voice had more weight in it now, less of the clipped hesitation from before. By midday, they were working side by side in silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a chair or the sound of paper shifting. When she finished a stack, she set it down in perfect alignment and leaned back. "How do you fix the broken ones?" Corin looked over. "Depends how they're broken. Cracks get patched, water damage gets dried and sealed. Some I have to copy completely before they fall apart."
She thought about that. Like making them new again? Not new, just whole enough to last. Her mouth twitched at that answer, and for the first time he heard something close to a laugh when she shook her head at a slip with half its seal worn off. It was short, almost quiet enough to miss, but it was there. In the afternoon, she asked if she could open one of the sealed chart tubes. He gave her an older one with no risk of damage, showing her how to twist the cap slowly.
She unrolled the map across the table, leaning over the ink lines with her hair spilling forward. "What's this?" she asked. "Trade routes from 30 years ago," Corin said. "Most of them are closed now." She traced one of the faded lines with her fingertip, careful not to press too hard. "Where's your place on here?" "Off the map," he said. "This was before my time." That answer seemed to satisfy her. She rolled the chart back with the same slow precision he'd shown her, and when it was sealed again, she stayed at the table instead of drifting back to her room. The next day, when Corin said he needed to walk to a nearby repair stall for replacement tools, she surprised him by saying, "I'll come." There was no question in her voice. It was a decision. They stepped out into the quarter's main path. The air had a sharper bite, and the smell of damp alloy carried down from the dome's condensation vents. Lyrae kept pace with him, her bead in her pocket instead of her hand. She still watched people carefully, but when a tall woman in a dark coat passed them on the opposite side of the path, she didn't move behind him. She just kept walking. At the repair stall, Corin picked up the tools and exchanged a few words with the vendor. When he turned, Lyrae was looking across the lane at a small food stand. The vendor there was handing a child a hot bread roll, the steam rising into the cold air. Lyrae's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then she looked back at him. "Can we get one?" she asked. He bought 2. They ate them on the walk back, the bread soft and hot enough to steam in their hands. Lyrae finished hers quickly, licking the crumbs from her fingers, and for the first time he saw her face relax completely in public. Back at the hall, she set her bead on the crate and said, almost casually, "Next time I'll go to the market with you." Corin didn't comment, but he stored the words away. That choice had to come from her, and now it had. The decision to go back came from her. It was early in the dome's morning cycle, the streets outside still quiet except for the hum of the circulation fans and the occasional clatter of a passing supply cart. Corin was tightening the straps on a storage crate when Lytrae stepped into the main room. She wore the teal garment, her hair brushed smooth, the bead tied into a small cord around her wrist. "I want to see it," she said. He didn't have to ask what she meant. His hands paused over the crate. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I don't want it in my head anymore." Corin studied her face for any sign she was saying it out of pressure, but there was none. Her voice was steady, her eyes level. He set the crate aside and checked his coat for the sidearm he never carried loaded, not because of danger from the street, but because he refused to bring violence into her recovery. The walk to the Forgotten Quarter took them through the same routes they had used the day he found her, only this time in full light. The air carried the tang of cold metal and the faint stink of the waste vents. Lytrae kept pace with him, her steps measured but firm. When they reached the alley, it was exactly as he expected. The mound was gone, trampled flat by time and passers-by, but the cargo wall leaned at the same sharp angle. Rust streaked the metal in deep orange lines. Bits of crushed weed and trash clung to the seams. Lytrae stopped several steps away. For a long moment, she didn't move. Corin didn't speak. He knew the choice to close the distance had to be hers. She walked forward until she stood where the mound had been. Her eyes moved over the ground, then to the wall, then back to the dirt. She crouched, pressing her fingers into the soil.
It was dry now, loose and crumbly. She let it run from her hand, watching it scatter in the faint breeze from the vents. "This is where she left me," she said, not asking, not wavering. "Yes," Corin said.
She straightened and looked around the alley.
It's smaller than I remembered.
"That's because you're not lying in it anymore." Her gaze lifted to meet his, and for the first time since they met, there was no flicker of fear behind her eyes. She took a slow breath and exhaled, as if pushing something out that had been sitting heavy in her chest. "I'm not afraid here now," she said. Corin nodded once. "You don't have to be. Not ever again." She stepped to his side and slipped her hand into his without looking at him. "We can go home now." The walk back was quieter. She didn't scan the crowd like she used to, didn't tense at every tall figure. When they passed a coat stall, she glanced at the display without flinching, even though the fabric matched the dark color her stepmother wore. Back at the hall, she went straight to the back room and placed her bead carefully on the crate. Then she came back to the main room and sat at the table. "Can we work?" she asked. Corin brought out a box of damaged star charts and set them between them. She leaned forward, unrolling the first map with steady hands. The heater hummed softly in the background, the only sound besides the rustle of paper. Hours later, the dome's day cycle dimmed toward evening. Liptere was still at the table, head bent over a chart, her hair falling forward. Corin watched her for a moment, seeing the difference in her posture. No trace of the defensive curl she'd had when she arrived. When she noticed his gaze, she lifted her head. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Just glad you're here." She looked at him for a beat, then gave a small, certain nod. "I am too." The rest of the evening passed in quiet work and shared space. No locks checked twice, no glances toward the door. When she finally drifted to sleep on the couch, the beads still tied to her wrist, Corin knew the fear that had once buried her was gone for good. This was home now, for both of them.